For some of our most vulnerable, power bills are on the way up.
Contact Energy warns consumers face significantly higher power bills from April 2025 when new regulated line charges kick in, on top of inflation-linked increases from this April.
Genesis Energy is suffering from inflation. It says that's the reason for having to put up prices for about 11% of customers.
Power companies are alerting some consumers to another increase in their bills as low-use fixed charges continue to be phased out.
Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, power bills are soaring, and it's not always easy to tell what you're being charged for or how the charging system works. Low fixed use, variable, time of use, anytime. What do these terms actually mean? And how is the bottom line arrived at? Could we save money by using gas? Well, no.
New Zealand households currently using gas appliances and petrol vehicles could save thousands every year if they went electric.
But will that put more strain on the system?
New Zealand's power network is under increasing pressure with more electric vehicles in use and companies ditching fossil fuels.
Transpower is signalling there could be power cuts this winter to manage supply and demand in the power sector if the wrong conditions were to combine. There's a significant pressure on hydro lakes to deliver the electricity or energy required, as well as thermal generation.
How can we think smarter about electricity? Later, I'll talk to a co-author of a study into rewiring our homes about how we might be able to rely less on the power grid. But first, let's look at power bills with a power bill interpreter. Jessica Wilson is a member of the Consumer Advocacy Council, set up by the last government after a review into skyrocketing electricity prices.
So typically on the front page of the bill, you'll see things like your account number, your address and billing details. And obviously, you'll also see how much you need to pay that month and when it's due. And it's often when we look at that amount that we feel like we need a cup of tea and a lie down.
Yeah.
On the second page of the bill, you will then get more detail about how that charge is made up. So there are two main components to a bill. One is typically called the fixed daily charge. That's really a charge for being connected to the network. So regardless of whether you actually use any power in a month, you'll still pay that fixed daily charge. So it covers the cost of things like the poles and the wires that bring power to your house. The other main charge, of course, is based on how much electricity you've actually used for the month. So this time of year, days are getting shorter, nights are getting colder. We all tend to see our bills increase, and the risk of bill shock increases at the same time.
It does. So those are the two basics. So you got your variable charge, which is based on the amount of power you used, and the fixed charge, which is a daily rate.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got obviously GST on top of that, and depending on your retailer, you may see a separate line for the Electricity Authority levy. So that's a levy that all consumers pay. Some retailers will display it separately, others include it in your variable rate. So the levy is calculated on how much electricity you've used for the month. So it's sometimes buried in that variable rate for your overall electricity use for the month.
Okay, and that goes to the Electricity Authority. And what is the role of the Electricity Authority?
Some of it goes to the Electricity Authority. Some of it is also used to fund energy efficiency programs that the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority runs. The role of the Electricity Authority, they're basically the regulator of the electricity sector. So they have overall responsibility for making sure things are working as they should and changing the rules of how the wholesale market operates if things are going haywire.
Okay, right, thank you. So that's the basics of a bill. It sounds pretty simple, but it does get a little bit complicated when you start getting into time of use charges and that kind of thing. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah. Well, look, many people just have one charge, and that's called an anytime charge. So regardless of the time of the day, you'll still pay the same amount for your power use. Time of use pricing is where your retailer may offer you a cheaper rate to use electricity at off-peak times. So if you use it overnight or during the day when there's less demand for power and it's cheaper to supply, the retailer may offer you a cheaper rate than at peak times, such as, the typical dinner time or early in the morning when we're all using electricity and there's more demand on the network. So essentially, it's just varying rates for the time of day when you use power.
Right, and that would also include like a free day of power or a free hour of power, some of those promotions?
Yeah, they're kind of similar. Yeah, we're seeing a bit of that creeping into the market now, where retailers are enticing customers by offering a free hour or a couple of hours of power. What you do need to be careful of when you think about these offers first is the offer realistic? Can you change your power use to the time of day or evening when the retailer is offering that discount? And secondly, how does it affect your standard rates for power use that the retailer is offering? Are you, for example, paying a higher per kilowatt hour charge to compensate the retailer for offering you that free deal? So you kind of got to look at those numbers, compare what you're paying for power outside of that free use period.
Any other kind of important parts of a bill that we have missed?
Look, one of the kind of important things, and it's not always on all bills, is your meter reading. So it's really useful, particularly if you're checking whether your bill is accurate for the month, to have a meter reading. So you can go and look at your meter board and say, okay, yep, that's right, I'm being charged for the right amount of power that I have actually used. It's particularly important if your retailer has sent you an estimate. So if the estimate is way out, you can compare that with what you have actually used, what your meter is saying, and contact your retailer and say, well, this is my accurate meter reading. Please revise my bill. I only want to pay for what I've actually used.
There's obviously different meters, aren't there? You can have a smart meter or a traditional meter where a meter reader has to come round and have a look at the reading, right?
That's right. So the old style meters, people would be familiar with meter readers coming around monthly. So smart meters have been being rolled out to replace the old style meters. And smart meters, in theory, they should all be able to be read remotely. However, in practice, that doesn't always happen. So for some reason, the power company might not be able to pick up the signal from your smart meter and might not be able to read it remotely. So they will send you an estimate. All
right. So it always pays to check when you get that power bill.
Yeah.
I haven't done that myself, so maybe I should go and do that. I always just assume it's accurate, but
Well, look, particularly if you've got a really high bill and you think, what's happening here, check if it's an actual or an estimated reading, and then you can do the self-check yourself by looking at your meter.
Okay, cool. Thank you. There's no one standard power bill. That's the thing. And some companies have examples on their website. Some of them don't. I've looked at Meridian, for instance, and then I've actually got a real power bill that Meridian sent out to somebody, and it looks completely different from the example on their website. I'm like, where's that part? It's not there,
Yeah, at the moment, there's no standard information they need to provide. So it is a whole mishmash of different styles, different formats, even different words used to describe the same thing. So not surprisingly, you can be confronted with something that looks totally different from what your previous company might have been providing you with. So comparing can be a little bit tricky and time consuming.
Yeah. I mean, what are some of the changes coming through? I mean, some of these low use charges are going to be removed. Is that correct?
The previous government decided to phase out low use fixed charges, which around 60% of households are eligible for, arguing it was unfair for higher use households to pay more for distribution.
Yeah, so one of the other recommendations of the electricity price review that we talked about before was that low fixed charge tariffs should be phased out. Now, these tariffs have been around since about 2004. What they meant is that if you were a low user, if your household didn't use that much electricity, and the cap was set at 8,000 kilowatt hours a year, or slightly higher in the South Island, Lower South Island, it was 9,000 kilowatt hours a year. What it meant is that you paid a lower fixed daily charge for connection to the network. and that was originally capped at about 30 cents. What the Electricity Price Review recommended was that these tariffs should be phased out. They concluded that these tariffs were disadvantaging households who may be high users but low income. So there was some equity issues they considered, and the tariffs are having some perverse effects for those households. There was also a big push from the industry to get rid of these tariffs because they contended that it made their life more difficult, and they were also arguing that it prevented them from offering more innovative pricing options such as time of use tariffs. So the tariffs are being phased out at the moment. There's a 5-year phase out. They'll go up again this year on the 1st of April. And so people who are currently on low use plans will see a change in their daily fixed charge as a result of the phase out of these tariffs.
So is this supposed to be a positive change? Or should people expect their power bills to go down?
Well, look, one of the quid pro quos was that you would see your fixed charge go up, your fixed daily charge go up, but you should expect to see some slight reduction in what you paid for your actual power usage. What we don't have is a really good analysis of what has happened with the phase out and whether we are seeing those pricing changes come through as anticipated. There was planned to be a review of the phase out partway through, but we haven't seen that review yet.
It's not now clear whether a review of the policy to be done by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment will go ahead.
It was sometimes difficult for consumers to tell whether they should be on a low user or a standard because getting information about their annual usage wasn't always easy. So one of the things that power bills need to contain, and that not all of them do, is information about your annual electricity consumption, how much you actually use over the course of a year. So that helps you make decisions about, which plan you should be on.
Okay, well, that's probably a good time to bring in your model bill. As part of the Consumer Advocacy Council, you've come up with a model bill, haven't you?
Yeah.
How did you come up with this bill?
Well, look, initially we did a bit of research internationally to find out what was happening in other comparable countries. And then we developed something that we thought would work for New Zealand consumers. We took it out and tested it with some focus groups. We also did some survey research with consumers to find out, for example, whether they felt a best plan notice, a notice on your bill telling you if there was a cheaper plan, would be useful. We found very high support for that.
So what's different about this model bill? What's in it that you wouldn't see in a bill these days?
Well, we've identified the key information consumers need to help them understand their bill and to work out, for example, if they're comparing different retailers, whether it's worth switching. So basic things like the name of your electricity plan, what's that called? So if you're using switching sites, for example, you can see your plan name there and identify it and look at how it compares with other plans being offered. We also want a proper breakdown of your bill so you can see what you've been charged, what the components are, and information on your usage over time, that 12-month period, so how much you've used for the year, what you've paid for the year. That also makes decisions about when you're doing comparisons much easier. If you have that annual information there, you can easily work out whether it is worth changing.
Now, what if we could actually just forget about these bills? Maybe throw them out, saving money on electricity while using more of it. You probably know where this is going. And it involves panels on your roof, sunshine, and crucially, batteries. This is Josh Allison, who leads research and development at Rewiring Aotearoa. He's been working on the Electric Homes Report.
We're a charity, a non-profit, and our goal is really to represent the consumer in the energy system. We've seen that historically the consumer hasn't had much of representation in the energy system, taking it from their perspective. And we ultimately do research on what does it look like for homes to go fully electric, go zero emissions. We're actually at the point now that you can go all electric and do the smart thing from the environmental perspective. That's now also the smart thing from a financial perspective.
I mean, in your report, it does mention that we are one of the first countries where the electrification of homes and vehicles can help us save a lot. How have you found that? How are we one of the first countries?
Yeah, so it's driven by a few different things. One of the things is we have very expensive fossil fuel prices, as I'm sure you know from the cost of petrol at the pump. And so that's one aspect. Another aspect is we have very low-cost solar and relatively low-cost electricity, and it's still not entirely low cost. Could be lower cost, and solar makes that lower cost. That's quite different to other countries around the world. So some other countries around the world, for example, countries that produce their own petrol, have lower-cost petrol, and therefore probably still cross this tipping point in time because the electric vehicles are so much more efficient to drive. But because they import less, for example, they have then at the pump lower costs, which means that it takes a little bit longer to reach that tipping point where doing this electrically is then cheaper.
But we've reached that tipping point, yeah?
Exactly. We've reached that tipping point where now for the average home, they could electrify and save money in their total cost of those items and the energy for the home.
So what are the overall advantages of going electric?
I'd say the number one is cost, especially right now, and, cost of living crisis. Being able to save on energy bills is a huge, huge win. The other win is this is one of the biggest and fastest things we can do to reduce our emissions as a country. It's often not recognised, and we go into this in the report, that households are actually one of the largest areas of emissions in our economy. And this is really important to understand the decisions that are made around the dinner table ultimately, which is what car do we drive, how do we heat our water, how do we heat our home, and so on. They actually account for a very large portion of emissions. And I would say the other thing to add, which is really important for us here in New Zealand, is that a solar and battery home, which is still connected to the grid, of course, provides significantly more resilience. This is a home that can run for days if needed when there's a natural disaster. For example, if you have the new electric cars that are coming out with vehicle to grid, so the car can back up the home too, you can have 1.8 electric cars parked in your driveway that could back up your home for 10 days in a natural disaster.
Your first on the list of advantages was cost, but power bills are going up and up and up. Going electric sounds like it's just going to create more costs for us to set it up. So how can you justify that cost as one of the big advantages when it's a disadvantage too, isn't it?
So one of the really important things here that we're working on at Rewiring Aotearoa is giving finance access to every home. Ultimately, we should leave no home behind in the energy transition, and we need all homes to be able to save money from doing this. And the primary barrier there is access to finance. If you can finance your solar install, for example, over the warranted lifetime of those solar panels, it will lower your energy bills from day one, and you'll be paying lower energy bills all the way through. The problem we see at the moment is that there aren't that many good finance products available for homes to access this, which means that they have to get hit by the upfront cost and then get the savings later on. And that, of course, especially then comes down to, do you have access to that capital? And a lot of homes won't. And do you have access to get approved for the finance? And so with something like solar, we know it's significantly lower cost, or it's about a third of the cost or less, depending on the interest rate you finance it at, a third of the cost or so of the grid. And so as long as you can finance that, then you can get significant bill savings from day one.
The other thing is that, and maybe you've answered this problem through talking about solar, but if we all go electric, there's going to be more of a strain on the electricity grid, isn't there? We've already heard about how much strain the grid's under in the peak of winter.
Transpower was fined $150,000 for its role in 34,000 homes losing power on one of the coldest nights of August in 2021.
So how do you overcome that?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. In the report, the primary home that we use to demonstrate this actually has a rooftop solar install and a battery install, all paid for at lower cost and saving that $1,500 a year, as you see in the report, than a fossil fuel home. And so what's important to note here is that the home also has a battery. And so in this primary scenario that we have for the savings there, the home is actually only consuming about half as much electricity from the grid as the average home does today. And so it would actually reduce the amount of electricity consumed from the grid in this scenario. And this is really important context because we've had these dropping prices of solar and batteries that have been perhaps pretty unrecognized in our energy system. And so, as you mentioned, the prices have been going up and up, but solar and battery prices have been going down and down. So as we plan out how we build our energy system going forward, we should really be maximizing the amount of rooftop solar and batteries that homes have and letting them participate more in the energy system. The lowest cost source of electricity in New Zealand is rooftop solar. So maximizing that and maximizing the ability of our communities to utilize that and to share that will give us a lower cost energy system, which is, of course, what we want. During the day, you have solar on your roof and you have a battery, say in your garage on the side of your house. The solar will charge the battery, so you have that battery filled up and ready to go into, for example, heating overnight or any usage overnight. And you would also put that solar into your water heater, and we call that a thermal battery, but ultimately what that's doing is instead of heating your water heater just before you need to use it, it's heating it in the middle of the day because the water heater is well insulated. And so the water heater actually then stays warm for use later on, which means that you get to heat with that much, much cheaper electricity from the solar, and then just top that up over time instead of heating it all from the grid. And so you end up storing mostly solar, although you can also store grid electricity for use when you would like to use it most. For example, if there are spikes in the electricity price, you could take grid electricity into your battery when it's at a low price and then put it back, or use it when the grid electricity is at a high price.
So like some of the finance on this, we talked about the finance, but what options are out there to finance solar, etc.?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So for example, people can add this to their home loan with banks right now. So for people who have a home loan, it's comparatively easy compared to if you're renting or you don't have a home loan. But there are multiple, for example, green loan type things from banks where they have lower interest rates for this type of upgrade, for making your home more efficient, which is what electrification and electric machines do, and also adding solar to your home. So I'd say that's the best place to start, and then we'll hopefully be getting more finance products available, especially to low-income homes and renters, as we do more work at Rewiring.
That's it for today. Thanks to our guests Jessica Wilson and Josh Allison. The Detail is funded through RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was engineered by Jeremy Ansell and produced by Alexia Russell. I'm Tom Kitchen. Ka kite anō.